Welcome back to the Aviation RC Noob Podcast. You found us. My name is Joe.
And I'm Matt.
We're here to be with you along your journey and to share our experiences in RC aviation. If you have any questions, thoughts, or want to share a flight story, hit us up at aviationrcnoob@gmail.com. Now, buckle in. Let's take off. And we're back. Welcome everybody to episode 34. Matthew, you done with the giggles?
I don't know, man. There's been a lot of things to giggle about before we got here.
Yeah. So Audacity's been running for about 34 minutes recording at this point, and we're just now getting going. So,
so good.
Ooh. So,
all right, what's the name of this episode?
What did we name this episode? Let's see. A little off the top. How to trim your aircraft.
Nice.
Rather clever there, Matthew. Thank you.
Yeah, sure.
Right.
I enjoyed it when I thought about it. I'm like, trimming? I'm like, you mean like a haircut?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yep. So tonight we're going to be talking about trimming aircraft, specifically in response to a listener question that we had gotten. And, so we'll be talking about that in a little bit. But as always, why don't we start off with what we've been doing? I feel kind of bad, but I'm just going to say I haven't had much going on. There's been a lot going on here just in life and around the house and with work. Yeah. So I've not really been able to, although I did pop into the build party, which I'm sure you'll talk about in a little bit for a few minutes.
Yeah, we will.
Yeah. I mean, I've at least kind of moved some planes around the garage, mostly just moving the sea duct out of the way so it didn't get damaged.
Yeah, well, I'm glad it's not damaged more, and I know you'll get to it soon enough. I know you've been in and out of the Discord group kind of commenting on things here and there. So, I mean, I know you've been involved. It's just I know you've been focused on more important things at the minute. And that's just the way it is, man.
That's the way it goes. I mean, I've looked at the sea duct generally when I pass through the garage, and I think about, all right, when I go to fix it, how am I going to do it? So I think I've about got a game plan in place for when I actually do it.
Yeah, and I think once you feel good about that game plan, you'll get going on it. That's kind of how I am. I kind of stick a plane that I want to get working. I've got a plane sitting over to my right here that's the Lincoln Sport that's probably 3 years old, I think. I don't know, man. I built it a long time ago. And I tried it, and it didn't work, but it's in good shape. And I would like just sort of put it aside. Anyway, it's one of those things. I always have it in eyesight, so I can say, I'm going to get back to that one. Yeah. So I don't forget about it. So that's a good plan.
I mean, I've got to get something going here pretty soon because Sam's been gracious enough to say if I ever reach out to him, I'll let him know what color or send him a picture. He can send me the wingtips.
I can't send him a picture. You do do it. Do it now.
I will. Well, not now.
No, anyway. Not now, please. We need to. We need to keep the conversation going. We need to get to trimming.
Right. Well, before we do, what have you been up to?
Oh, man, I've actually had a pretty busy couple of weeks, at least in the hobby. I don't know what kind of drove me to get deep. Oh, I know why. I was hanging out on our Discord forum here and there, and a couple guys kind of popped in, and just like last time, Jesse and I will get into our troublemaking episodes, and all of a sudden I've got 3 planes that I want to get out of my head and onto some paper and foam and see if it gets into the sky. So I mentioned last time, I think that he had inspired me to make a foam board version of the plane that he's been bringing out to the field. And so I was working on that. I'm calling that the Magician. The balsa version is called the Sorcerer. So I'm going to call it the Magician.
Okay.
And I'm looking at, once I get it flying, and I almost did, I'll talk about that in a second. I plan on kind of going back in, kind of popping off the wing tips and setting up a lighting system so it can work its magic at night. I finally got back to the Hangar RC's Texan T6. Actually, it's not finally. I tried it last time we talked, and it was unsuccessful and needed a couple of quick repairs. So I got back to it and I kind of looked at it. I adjusted the servos that were out of center. I don't know how they quite got out of center, but I don't know, maybe I didn't center up right. I'm certain it's builder error. So I took a couple minutes and really like sat with it, specifically focused on servos and getting them set right. So I set them right. And then I noticed the wings were not parallel, not even with the horizontal stabilizer in the back. So I realized like, well, what happened there? And chances are when it landed, the wing's pretty strong. So it might have crushed a little bit of the foam there and given it a little bit more up on one side. So I kind of wedged in, it's basically about 3/16 inch thick of a difference. So when I wedged in a little bit of foam in there, I realized, yeah, it's pretty level. Like that's actually right in line with what it should be with the tail feathers. And so that's like when we talk about checking your crap, that's looking for alignments. So you want to check the alignments and make sure that the horizontal stabilizer is in line and even with the main wing, you know.
Do you know how many of my horizontal stabs are not in line with my wings?
Right, and then of course your vertical stab should be perpendicular to those. And I know but I was just, there were some weird tendencies. And I wanted to make sure that all of those things that might give me weird tendencies would just be not in the picture. Because I just wanted to get this thing flying the way it should be flying. So, and then I double checked, I double checked where the CG was and it was where I thought it was. So I must have had, everything must have been just off center enough where it just flew awful. So, and again, that is all builder error. So after I went back and I did all that stuff, I brought it out to the field again. And I was about to go fly it on Saturday, this past Saturday. And I realized that one of the sections, I guess in the crash, had kind of loosened some of the glue. So the tail had a little bit of wiggle, the tail section to the main fuse. I'm like, darn it, I can't fly today. Like, you know what? I mean, like, part of me is like, well, that's not that much of a wiggle. You can I'm like, no, Matt. Don't listen to that dumb voice in your head that wants you to just fly it. You're going to regret it. Don't do it. So I smartly put it aside and I brought it back home. I said, that's a quick fix and add a little reinforcing tape to it and it'll be good to go, solid. And I'm sure I should be able to do that tomorrow because this past weekend, my son had taken a Boy Scout trip. So I only had one of my boys with me all weekend. Logan was with me. So we got to, I had a little bit more flexibility with my weekend. So I was able to go back out on Sunday with that. Put the battery in there, made sure everything was good, double checked everything. CG was where I thought it should be. I powered it up and sent it off. And I put it at like 50% throttle, maybe like 60. It wasn't quite enough. And so I like cut the throttle, let it kind of come down. I went back out, grabbed it again. I said, okay, it needs like 80% throttle. And you know, this is that's that 2212 1400 kV motor with a 9x45 prop, APC prop.
So that little jet one you had sent me? CPAC equivalent?
Yes, I believe. Okay. Yeah, I think it's actually more like a BPAC equivalent. They oftentimes give it with an 8x6 prop. So that's a motor system that the Hanger RC recommends. So I was doing that with stock, and I think I had a 40 amp ESC just because I think it pulls a little bit more than a 30 amp, just to be safe. And I had a 2200 3S battery in there all the way up near the nose. Everything balanced out just the way it should. So I put it up to 80% throttle and let it go, and off it went. And it flew easy and honestly, and then I brought it back to like 50% throttle and just cruised real gentle and slow, easy to control. I could do loops, I could do rolls, I could do whatever. I was kind of doing really high, very poor, what are those things? Knife edges. You know, so I turned it on its side and kind of kicked the tail down a little bit, and it was awful. I did a terrible job with it, but I was like, okay, it's got some controls, and let's, you know, so kind of let it go around, and you know, and I brought it around. So the thing I did, I put a piece of tape from pretty much the nose section around to the back fuse section on both sides, and that's just to make sure that if for some reason the glue on the butt joints of the individual like formed sections gives,
Right.
the tape will keep it, and at least so you can get it to the ground.
Basically those sectionals like the Corsair had.
Exactly
Yeah.
that. Yep. For whatever reason, like I said, mine gave, and it was probably during the previous attempt when it landed, the tail hit, and put a bunch of stress on that joint. So anyway, so I flew it around. I have to say that Sam did a great job in choosing. I'll call it the livery, because the top has two of the colored, whatever color you want. It'll have like two colored stripes across the wing.
Right.
And that was awesome because that really helped me understand what was top and what was bottom. And I think on the bottom, I think he's got a couple solid black stripes. So you can tell like one side is colored, one side is black, and it is clear you're looking at the bottom of the plane or the top. And there was a couple spots where it was pretty helpful. And it was really beautiful to see kind of cruising around the sky. There weren't too many people there, but the people that were there watching were like, that's a really cool looking plane. And the guy I was talking to you earlier, who's kind of new to the club, when I brought it down, he's like, what is that? That looks really awesome. I said, well, this is a company called the MotionRC. I said, they make planes that are similar to the flight test planes in the sense that they're foam board, but he's like, I don't like the paint. I'm a graphic artist. I can make a skin that you can put on there. It looks great. And I said, so that's what he's doing. I said, and so this is one of his models. I said, so far, everyone we've tested has flown really well. So if that's something you want to try, I urge you to try it. And he's like, oh, that's really cool. So it flew great. I really wish I had more batteries to kind of run through it and more time. But I was able to put that away and try some of the other things.
Well, that speaks well to the flight if you ran out of batteries for it.
Not only did I run out of batteries, but the second I brought it in, I'm like, this is a Spitfire. Like this is on that level of I should bring it out to the field every time because it'll always be a good time to fly.
Nice.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I almost immediately was like, oh yeah, this is going to be, I don't know how I had I don't know. It's just my luck, I guess. I don't pay attention to certain things. I'm just eager to get out to the field and try to fly it. And I should pay more attention to what I'm putting in the electronics, I guess.
We gotta find a happy medium between you and me because you'll whip them together so fast, but I take ages.
I know, right? I'll whip them together before I put the electronics, and then I hit the electronics, and it's like somebody put my feet in cement.
Yeah.
And then I finally like, oh, fine, I'm going to do it, and then I do it, and I like buzz through it because I'm like, I just want to get this done and in the air, and then I regret it later, maybe. Anyway, so I also finished up the Magician, and I had a flight worthy on Saturday, and I tossed it into the air, and it turned to the left gently, and I could not turn it to the right no matter how much right rudder, or I had it on the aileron stick, but no matter how much right rudder I gave it, it did not turn to the right. So I just did a couple slow loops that kind of turned a little bit severe, and I couldn't recover from it, and they landed in the beans, which untied shoes. I mean, it's that kind of bean. But it survived the landing pretty well. Needed a couple quick repairs, and to stiffen the booms, they were going back to the tail. It's pretty much what I learned.
What now?
The tail booms. I needed to stiffen those so that they wouldn't move as much.
Okay.
Because there was a lot of lateral movement, and the rudders are tied together. And the other option I could have done was basically put another servo in the tail and had the rudders individually, but Y connected in the wing, but individually done up. Instead, I did a gang control.
I'm trying to find a picture of this. What is the Magician model of?
It's modeled after the Sorcerer. I'll go on.
Oh, that was.
Go ahead.
That was the Sorcerer was the one that Jesse had. Okay, that's what
the one we were blaming Jesse for. It's an 8-foot wingspan glider, and I had one of these massive it's a very big motor. It runs on 80 amp ESCs, and it has a 12x6 prop. It's got a lot of power behind it. So anyway, so I tried that, and I'm like, okay, well, I'll bring it home. I bring it home, and as I went out the next day, I brought it out with me. The booms look a lot better. I had a lot more confidence in it, but there'd been a couple weird things that one of the planes, the ESC was reversed. So when I plugged this one in, I think I still had that throttle reversed from the previous plane I was working with, and the thing powered up to full and took off on the ground into the table that was next to me.
Nice.
I mean, I wasn't in front of it, thankfully, and neither was the guy who was working on the assembly table next to me. But that plane went into it as fast as it possibly could. The motor hit the 2x4s and broke the prop and ripped the motor clean off the firewall. Actually, the firewall off the foam. And it just kind of chicken danced for a second until I got the throttle down. And it busted up a couple things. Like there's a little bit of damage to the wing. There's a little bit, the firewall came off. So I've got some repairs to do that, but I think it's fixable. I'm just so disappointed in myself that was the second, another attempt that just didn't go anywhere,
So I want to say, because I wasn't tracking what was happening with this magician, because you were talking about these booms.
Yes.
Real quick, for anyone who hasn't already gone to Google to look this up, and you can just look up Sorcerer Balsa plane.
Yep.
But it's a big wingspan. Is when he's talking about the booms, there's basically two booms that come back off the wings, and then each has a vertical stab that then ties into a horizontal stab. I guess your elevator's on that.
Yeah, it's an elevator.
Like the horizontal piece that would have the elevator runs from the top of the two vertical stabs across to each other. So when he's talking about these booms, he's talking about these things that are coming off the back to support the tail section. It's not like the fuse comes way back for a tail section.
Right. Yeah, it's almost like a P-38 in the kind of arrangement of its fuse and pods and all that stuff.
Like a Sea Duck too, actually, now that I'm looking at it.
Very
Sea
similar.
Duck has those booms that come back. Just your booms are real tiny.
They're real tiny. Yeah, and I guess because they're designed to be made with balsa, it has a lot more stiffness, so it can kind of take that. So I ended up putting carbon fiber arrow shafts in it and kind of tied them in the best I could, and it seemed to be pretty sturdy. So again, I would have loved to have tested it, but it chicken danced its way to death that day, so I'll have to go back another time. So you'll probably hear about it again next time we talk. I used the design techniques that from our last episode that Jack and Steve were talking about, specifically Jack, about how he designed Master Series stuff. And I've been looking around from my full-size stuff at different kit build planes. And one of the planes that I looked up the Dragonfly, and I'll talk about why in a second. But with that, there's a Burt Rutan design called the Quickie and the Dragonfly, and they're kind of sisters of each other. And they're basically a tandem wing, kind of crazy looking canard flyer.
Okay.
And I'm like, this, and it has some beautiful curves to it. And the wing is, I don't know, very Burt Rutan. High aspect ratio, long, thin, fat-ish wings.
Right.
Very laminar, flowy looking stuff. Anyway, so I was like, I think I could do this, right? So I just followed their methods, and by about 2 days later, I had, and you've seen a picture of it, I think. I think I did a really good job of capturing that very tricky to build model. And then I took it out and did a glide test, and that thing, it was gliding really well. I was pretty impressed. So now I have the death-defying feat of putting in electronics.
and actually putting it in the air.
Yeah, I'm putting it in the air. I'm going to be working on that in the next couple of days. I'm excited. Every time I kind of have it hanging around, because every time I see it, I'm like, ooh, it's so nice. I can't wait to get it going. So
I've been impressed with how that turned out so far.
Well, honestly, so if you weren't sure if their methods work, it works really good. I mean, it works really good. There is a little bit of time consuming with the trimming and cutting of the paper and kind of getting that set up with just have extra pieces of tape, a little bit of patience, and some extra paper.
Right.
But when you're done with that, you can then take that and trace it on your foam and flip it over along that mirror line, and like they were talking about, and trace it out again on that side and just start cutting and go. And then I took that pattern and took a picture of it to put it into CAD. So I have a plan with that skin So when I prove that this flies and I get a good flight video, I'm gonna definitely make sure that goes that is available for people to build or try to build. It's an interesting little plane. It's like a little APAC kind of quad motor style plane. One of the inspiration pieces was this plane called the Marabou. One of the things that I'll blame Jesse again on this because it was one of those sessions where we were all just like picking out planes from the. I think we might have talked about it. It has the it has the Prandtl D twist.
Okay.
Which is pretty awesome. It's almost like a blimp bottom hanging off of a Prandtl D wing, which is pretty neat. Because I don't know if the work of Prandtl D was entirely part of the design. I think it was modeled off the Mara, and the Mara is like the flying mustache, and that has that same kind of twist to it naturally. It's something that one of the guys was working on. So anyway, so I've got plans drawn up. So that's definitely on the table to build when I have a moment I want to just build. I've been working on repairing the sub 250 gram FPV wing that XJet had put on his channel. We'll have a link to that down below in the show notes. And it's basically just like a little quick lightweight flyer, and it's a flat plate deal, and it's just fun. It's fun. FPV is helpful because it's really small. So
yeah.
I flew the Piranha twice. I had, after having 2 unsuccessful flights, one, the Sorcerer basically doing a death spiral, and I couldn't fly the Texan. I'm like, well, I'll fly the Piranha. I brought it with me. So I got the thing set up in the launch assist mode, and I tossed it in the air, and off I went, and I cruised around the sky at 120 miles an hour of screaming joy. And brought it real low across the beans. Yeah, it was awesome. And it did a couple really low passes and just did a couple acrobatics and brought it back in because the 4 minutes were up, and just sat it down. I had a lot of people who were like, "Oh, that flew great. That was awesome." And it is. And when it's flying and it's doing what it's supposed to do, it's great. But then I have things like Sunday, which I took it out the next day, and I got into launch assist mode. And the only thing I noticed is that the throws seem to be very different. Yet I didn't change anything. I didn't change the model. I didn't change anything. But the throws were different. And so I'm like, all right, well, let's go. I mean, it tells me it's ready to go. So I launch it, and I can't pull far back enough on the elevator to get it up in the air.
Huh.
You know, it's just like it doesn't want to get in the air. And I think I was at like 85% throttle, which is more than enough of that. It's got a lot of oomph. So, I mean, it crashed on the ground, and I'll call it damage. Like the little tip of the nose kind of came off. That's easy to glue back on. There's a little bit of crushing of the nose that's easy to kind of undo. But I'm just disappointed because I was hoping I could just goof around and have a blast with it. And the second time I couldn't. I don't know. But when I do...
No idea what was causing that?
No, I don't know. I've got to sit down with the model I had it on to see if that might have somehow been it. Like the model I had assigned in the transmitter, because I was using my old radio link.
Mm-hmm.
And that just has 15 models you choose from. Pick one and go with it. So maybe I have to go with a different model. I don't know. I don't know. So I'll have to look into that and see if I try something different, if I can't figure it out. But that day it was disappointing. So I'm batting about 50-50 with the Piranha. Every time I fly, it's a 50-50 shot. It's going to get in the air. But when it does, it's awesome. And when it's not, it's just really disappointing. But it's made of EPP, and it kind of bounces off the ground mostly. So, you know, it's one of those ones, if I can figure out why it's not getting into the air consistently, if I can figure out why, so it always does, that's going to be my FPV platform, because once it's in the air, it is rock solid and fun. And I could see being in the goggles on that thing and just having a blast. So I'll figure it out. I brought out the Spitfire, rock solid, great time, flew wonderful, flew better than the Combat. I mean, I was doing
Really?
combat maneuvers and doing crazy crud with it, and I was like, oh my God, I forgot. This thing's so good. Why don't I bring this out every time?
Dude, that Spitfire has so many miles on it.
I know. It's ridiculous. It's ridiculous. And yet, it's solid.
Every time you talk about yours, I'm just like, man, I hate mine's gone.
Dude, we'll make another one.
I know.
Didn't I give you two? I gave two.
You gave me the cutouts for two of them. I just
don't make another.
Yeah.
Go make another. Go relax with it. Okay.
I'm going to do a better paint job on the second one.
Well, there you go. That's good. All the more reason to go do it. And then because my son was out with me, we brought out the like a little EPP chuck glider, a little 18-inch chucker, and we had a blast tossing it between us. And when I was flying a little bit, I could tell he was tossing it around in the background. And then we brought out the old Sparrow. It's like the first plane I built with my oldest son.
Okay.
And it was probably the third plane I built, period. And I built the Arrow, the Trainer, and the Sparrow. I couldn't find the balance on the Sparrow to save my life. And I'll tell you what, I went out there, I just picked it up. I'm like, oh, it's still in pretty good shape. I kind of did a couple things to make sure it was good. Aligned the surfaces, taped them in place so that they were straight the way they're supposed to be. And I put some weight in the nose, and I just sort of stuffed it in place and balanced it. And I'm like, yeah, that's where it should balance. All right, let's chuck it. And then Logan and I went outside, and we just chucked it back and forth. And I'm like, why were we having so much hard time with this? This flies great now.
I mean, you've got more time in
the
hobby, and
you're
more experienced.
Yeah, I know. And I knew that was why. But I was like, man, that would have been cool if we had done that the first time. I think Quinn would have probably gotten into flying a little bit more than he is now. Which anyway, so now that I know it's good, we can put a motor system in it and a couple servos and likely have a good time with it. So we'll see where that goes. And so, I mean, it's a lot, but I've been busy, and I mean, that's it apparently. For the hobby. I've been getting back into the full scale training. So most of the time it's basically like I was very rusty. I got back on the horse. A couple weeks, basically the plane that I was supposed to fly, that I normally fly on, is out of commission for maintenance. A bunch of different things it's got to take care of, and I guess it takes some time. So I've been flying on a different plane for now, but same model, just a different one, has more electronics in it. So it's got like a autopilot and a bunch of other stuff. It's great for when you want to learn how to fly instrument flying, but that's not what I need right now. So.
Right.
But yeah, typical stuff, which is doing practice landings, practice patterns, doing the radio call outs. We've flown to other airports, which is pretty neat. We've practiced crosswind landings, and just kind of fitting it in as best I can, kind of on a lunch or an early evening. And then with that, I've also been looking at like, well, what am I going to do to keep myself current once I'm done getting my pilot's license? Am I going to get an ultralight? Am I going to build a plane? Am I going to buy a plane if I can even afford it? Am I just going to rent? That kind of stuff. So I've just started kind of scratching that surface. So we'll see where that goes.
Okay.
That's it.
Yeah, well, that was you've been busy.
I have been.
I'll tell you, and it's crazy because you called me earlier today, and I was kind of expecting a phone call where you called me. You're like, "Hey, are we recording tonight?" Like, yeah, it's that week, and what we want to talk about and this that. And it hit me a little while before you called me. It's like, oh man, has it really been 2 weeks already? Like,
I know.
So. I'm glad you got some stuff done. So quickly before we dive into everything else, we did have a listener comment come in, and it's been a while. We've already responded to him. Richard had written in. It was basically saying he discovered a podcast, and he's been a fan of flight test planes and flying. He gave us kind of an outline of his history, the planes he's built and flown, such. And then his question was basically how to trim a plane. He says he's used the Aura 5 Lite, which I've recently got one of those myself. I just haven't put it in a plane yet. And he uses that in flight, level assist flight mode for flying around. And he said that he's been having other more experienced club members help him with maidens and trimming planes out, but that specifically, his question was any advice we might have on trimming planes out so they fly properly.
Okay.
And so we're going to be talking about that this episode.
Heck yeah.
After Matt, you've got a little bit of plane history you want to go over, but we'll be talking about, and that's basically where this episode's coming from, is Richard wrote in, was asking about it. So,
all right. So welcome, Richard, and thanks for the question. I wanted to touch on a former guest of ours, Red Jensen. He's the NASA pilot for test craft, RC scale test craft. I'm probably butchering that. I know he's got a whole long title, but
do I need to look it up?
No, it's okay. He talked last time that he touched upon it, and we just kind of ran out of time, that he was going to be at the Reno races and that he was building a plane that he may or may not be flying in it, but that he was definitely going to be there, and he's kind of actively part of that community. Well, over the last couple weeks, he's been, if you followed him on Facebook or anything like that, after listening to our episode, you've probably seen him posting live video feeds and comments here and there and pictures here and there about the Reno races. And he definitely live streamed one of the races, and he was commentating as he went, which was really cool to see. So I have a feeling now that the Reno races are concluded, that we're probably going to see about getting him back on to talk about that passion of his, and maybe touch on a little bit more about STEM and kind of how the two tie together, I imagine. So look out for an episode like that. But Red, congratulations on your work with the Reno Air Races, and we look forward to talking to you soon if you're listening.
Last Friday, just a couple nights ago, wasn't it?
No, it was 2 weeks ago.
Was it 2 weeks ago? The 17th? It was like
when we released our last episode. So I guess it's over a little over a week ago.
Okay. We had the last build night. And it sounded like there was a few guys that popped in for that one, including Richard.
Yep.
Which I was only able to pop in kind of halfway through for a few minutes, but it looked like you guys were having a pretty good time.
Yeah, it was a good time. Always enjoy those myself, but it seemed that the community was having a really good time just chatting about what we're doing and talking about all sorts of different things.
Okay. Well, we're going to go ahead and announce our next activity. I'm not going to call it a build night because Matthew and I want to do a sim night. So, October 22nd, that's Friday night. 8 to 11?
Sure. Sounds perfect.
8 to 11 Eastern Time. We're going to do a simulator night. MotionRC is the one that Matthew and I have used and managed to fly together. MotionRC version 6. So down in the show notes, we'll have the links to where you can go and download that. I think it downloads as you can download the 5.5, and then there's update patches to 5.5, the various versions, and then up to 6.0. So just kind of download the install files and all the update patches. Go ahead, Matthew.
Well, I was going to say it's essentially a CD image file for 5.5. So the MotionRC has released or lost its copyright holdings because the company that owned it went belly up and nobody bought it. So it became openware or freeware at that point. And there's a person who basically made sure that they had an archive of it for everybody to kind of use and try. Now, some people do or don't like MotionRC. I mean, I like some of the physics of it and some of the way it flies. Some people like RealFlight or other flight sims better. It's kind of your own thing, but my thought is this is free for anybody. So if you just started in this hobby, take your transmitter that you just bought to go try to fly a plane and see if you can't get it hooked up to the Phoenix Sim. It won't cost you a dime, and it'll certainly save you a lot of money with your planes.
Right. And so the download page will say that there's a dongle that's needed, and that goes back to the days when you had to have a dongle to do the software. But it also says that any joystick will work.
Yep.
Which then you can download and install a emulator, and they've kind of got a lot of this information on that page.
It is.
I have to download and run mine through a emulator.
Yep.
Which basically takes my transmitter and I hook it up via USB to my computer, but it takes that transmitter, all the signals that it's sending via the USB, and runs it through the simulator so that the software then treats that information as though it's coming from a joystick setup. So then I'm able to fly within the program.
Yeah, for some reason I couldn't get that to work on mine, but I also had the dongle. Right. You know, it's a 22-in-1 dongle you can get from Banggood or whatever it is, and it does the trick.
So if you're interested, and the reason that we're doing Phoenix RC in the 6.0, I think is when 6.0 is when they implemented the multiplayer, essentially.
Exactly.
Where we could get together, multiple people in one room and fly and see our planes flying around together. So if you're interested and you want to come join us for that, go ahead and get started now on getting that downloaded. Basically, this episode goes up on the 2nd of October is when this will go, and then so it's 1, 2, it'll be 3 weeks to go play around with stuff, figure it out. If you need help, feel free to pop into the Discord and ask. We'll help you as best we can. And it's better to get an early start on this so that you know if you got to have the dongle, maybe you can get it before. But otherwise, hopefully, most people will be able to use the emulator like I was able to.
Right.
And if this goes well, then we'll kind of trade off between build nights and sim nights.
And also, if you want to build and just chat with us while we sim, go ahead and do that. We're just I think one of us is gonna share a screen to make sure that if you're joining in to build with other people and talk, you can kind of see some of the stuff that we're doing. So you can be included and join in the conversation. So we'd love to have you come out on that night. We look forward to seeing you there when you get out. Look for the links down below in the description there. I think that is it for that. We have a Halloween episode coming up, right, Joe?
Yeah, or at least we're contemplating what we're going to do for it.
Yeah. One of the episode release dates is on the 30th of October. So if you'd like and you want to send us some of your scary stories, last year we did kind of I'll call it a public service night, kind of where like the radio stations would basically have somebody get really drunk to show you how bad things can get. Like, hey, like, hey, don't drink and drive, folks, that kind of thing. And kind of illustrate how impaired you become when you drink. Okay, so this isn't going to be that at all. We're not going to be drinking or anything. But if we share scary stories, we could basically pass along some of the wisdom that we've accidentally gained collectively as a community, and basically use that to help us understand what some of the dangers are and to keep our minds on being safe when we're out flying. So send us your scary stories so we can, if you'd like, and we'll include them in that episode. All right.
Well, are you ready to talk about your history segment for a few minutes before we get into trimming?
Yeah, I'll talk about as we've been going through, we've been talking about fighter craft. Lately, we've been talking about World War II aircraft, and this is not going to be any different. We're going to talk about the nemesis to the Spitfire, the German Focke-wulf 190, nicknamed the Dora. And so basically it was the German counterpart to the Spitfire. It outperformed the early Spitfires in everything but turning. It had a higher ceiling. It was a faster climb rate. It had more power. It was a generally better aircraft, but it did not turn as fast as Spitfire. And of course, in a dogfight, that could mean the difference between success and failure, of course. So
Mhm.
let me go through some specs really quick. I'm not sure if I'm going to be able to entirely make comparative sense of it, but if you know a lot about the Spitfire and the Mustang, um, hopefully these will help you. They're roughly the same size aircraft. The Dora is a 29-foot 4-inch long craft. It's got a wingspan of 34.5 feet, and it sits off the ground like most of them, about 10 feet. So what you'll notice is that it has a 1,200 pound or kilogram capacity. So that's like 2,700 pounds. So a little over almost 1.5 ton capacity for passengers and livery, or not livery. What is that? Guns and ammunition and bombs.
Armaments.
Yep, guns. Mostly guns.
More guns.
More guns, basically. And of course, that also includes fuel. Now, a lot of the most of the German arena was not. You didn't really have to go. They had to get out to England and back, basically. So I'm just looking to see if I can find the range. The range is about 600 miles. So, I mean, that's not terribly far compared to the 1,200 miles that you'll find like the Spitfire with the drop tanks and the Mustangs and some of the British aircraft. And basically when they went into combat, their range, of course, decreased. If they were carrying extra drop tanks, they could almost double their range, I believe. Yeah, about double their range with the drop tanks. Their service ceiling was 34,000 feet, which is pretty far up there.
Yes. Did they have to be pressurized at that point?
Yeah, I think they didn't have to be pressurized, but they did have to have oxygen.
Okay.
Yeah, and that's usually there was some cargo set aside for oxygen tanks and whatnot. Most of the time, they tried to keep. Well, it depended on what was going on, right? Depending on the mission. But I think they made some of these models that were designed for lower altitudes so that they weren't set up so that they could go to higher altitudes. It saved them some weight and gained them some maneuverability and functionality for lower altitude missions. But part of their missions was to get rid of bombers that were at very high altitudes. So they had to get up there and be a menace and try to defend Germany. So the rate of climb was 3,000 feet a minute, which means in 10 minutes they were at service altitude, which is, I mean, at their ceiling, it's pretty quick, honestly. 3,000 feet a minute. I'm trying to think of what I'd do, and I don't go that fast.
No,
but I'm also not trying to outrun anybody. So,
I mean, I think in civilian craft, or even just like what you're flying, you're probably doing maybe 150 foot a minute.
Yeah, that's it. Let me see if I can.
Like, you're not climbing terribly fast.
No, you're not at all.
I don't know. You might be climbing faster. Well, no, because I think your landing glide slope's like 150 foot a minute descent.
It possibly. Oh no, 500. I think it's 500 feet per minute. It depends on what you're.
Is it?
Yeah, it depends on what you're aiming for, right?
Okay.
But that's typically what I've been doing in my Cessna. That's the standard rate.
Maybe it was.
Because it only takes a couple minutes to go. When you're in the pattern, you're only about a couple minutes out. So you're at like 1,000 or 1,500 feet, and you want to drop down to zero in a couple minutes. So
yeah, I guess that's true. It's been a long time since
that's
I
okay.
did landings.
Yeah, I did mine earlier today, as a matter of fact. Did a couple of them. So the maximum speed on this guy is 405 miles an hour, which is almost identical to the Spitfire. It's a little bit faster. I think the Spitfire was like 370 miles per hour, something like that. This thing, if you look at the specs, it is just a little bit faster. And we're talking by like 30 miles an hour faster. It's a little bit higher, as in a couple more thousand feet. It is a comparable craft. And honestly, so a lot of the German aces got a lot of their ace kills in this craft. So it was, in the beginning of the war, it was a force to be reckoned with. It was really dangerous. And as the craft, I guess, became older, and some of the technologies started to come out for the Americans and the British. This aircraft kind of fell more in line with their enemies, and then eventually kind of fell behind a little bit. I mean, they were doing the same thing that the Americans were, which were upgrading their craft as it went. There's, I think, somewhere around 10 or 15 different versions of this aircraft, different models of it. And each one they were making improvements, of course. I'm not going to go through all those. What I am going to say, there were a couple of things that were big, I'll call big innovations with this craft. I'm going to touch on three. Well, really just two, and I'm going to touch on like how many. It was also there was a lot of them built. There's over 24,000, but 23,800 were made and put into service until 1945 in Germany. And then I guess the production was then leased or basically given to France, and they continued making them all the way up until 1949 as French aircraft. Yep. It wasn't a ton of them after. I think it was like 500 or 600 after in that period between 1945 and 1949. But their big thing is, so the Germans didn't really believe that putting in a radial engine, while there was a lot of talk about the power efficiency of a radial engine in compared to an inline piston aircraft where the pistons are on either side.
Right.
By having them as a radial, it distributes the rotational load, I guess, more evenly, as well as putting the cooling load not in line, but basically kind of spreading it out maybe. One of the big things is that they were worried that the radial engines have such a big surface area, they create such a big drag force, and they were trying to make the craft as fast as they could. So one of the things they used was some of the new innovations from NACA, which were basically the NASA of the day. They were doing innovations in aircraft and trying to optimize, like doing tests, publicly available tests on what can help. Like the NACA duct, which is that little, I don't know, hourglass shaped, like half an hourglass shaped indent that's basically creates a suction. They figured out that that's the best shape to create a flow through suction vent. That and those kinds of things were going on for the previous 15 years. So these guys saw some of the papers and were like, oh, I don't know. And so they used some of the new cowling ideas and used that to be able to put the radial inside and cover most of the radial. But by using some of the new airflow information from the NACA papers and some of their testings, they were able to reduce the opening around the radial engine, but still pull enough air through to cool to properly cool the engines. So that was like a crazy new. That was something that the Germans were reluctant to try, and the designer of this aircraft decided it's worth the attempt, and it turned out it paid off. So they were able to keep the radial engine cool. The efficiencies of the radial engine were realized, and they had learned of a new way to basically streamline the aircraft. Because you can see it's a big spinner in the center. There's a small gap around that engine, and then there's the cowl as it kind of comes out and around. And then that smaller gap, it's not like a big radial, like I'm trying to like a Pete and Pole where there's a flat out like car radiator sticking out the top of the, and that's how they used to cool some of the engines back in World War I. So this is a kind of a new way to do it and keep it streamlined. So, and help with speed and some of the other efficiencies that they needed. One of the other things that I thought was really cool about the changes in here was they changed the control surface mechanisms. Most of the aircraft, to keep them light, were using cables. Okay. And what they realized is the cables over time would stretch. And when they stretched, they would start to become kind of sloppy. They would have a little bit of play and a little bit of whatever. And of course, when they wouldn't be as precise, right? And of course, in a dogfight, the more precise you can be, the better off. So what they did is they changed from being a cable system to being a push rod system for their control surfaces. And when they did that, they gained far more precise control. And this was one of the first aircraft for the German Air Force, for the Luftwaffe, to be able to put that into service and find success with it, obviously, because they used that all the way until the end of the only reason why it stopped in 1945 was because the war had ended. And Germany was required to dismantle basically or stop production of all their aircraft. So, I mean, that's it in a nutshell. That is, again, if you're flying a Spitfire or a Mustang, build one of these and have a friend fly it with you, and then you can have a dogfight. So what we're going to do is we put a couple links down in the description below. The Niezgodas, Squadron 13th Squadron. They have an excellent model of this craft. So give that a try. If you look around the FT forums, I know there's some more. They're not the only people making this. There's, if you want to find more information, the Smithsonian, we're going to put a link to the Smithsonian website. There's also, if you go to Outer Zone and look up Focke-wulf 190 or Fw190, you'll find a number of models that come out if you want to build a balsa one. There's a bunch of commercially available versions that are usually like ARFs or plug and plays, and they're from all the makers that have ever made planes, pretty much. It's a very popular model. Great Planes, E-Flite, Guillows if you want balsa, MotionRC, and the list goes on, honestly. And it depends on how big you want it, and what you want to make it out of.
Mm-hmm.
So go take a look. It's an interesting craft, and it's certainly, I have a feeling when I build one, it's going to be like, oh, this is just like a Spitfire. I'm going to put that in my always bring it to the field arsenal, So
yeah, well, I was looking at the 13th build page of their page for it, and there's some similarities, so I can see that.
Yeah. I mean, honestly, a lot of these craft were, they're built on very similar technologies, and there are only really minute differences that are making the difference between, I guess, how they perform.
Yeah.
So.
Well, thank you for doing that research and putting that together.
Sure, I appreciate it. Well, let's see how we can give our planes a haircut. Right? That's what we're talking about today.
Wow, that I know we talked about that earlier. That for a half second, I was like, "What are you talking about?"
A little off the top, Joe.
Oh,
let's talk about some trimming, huh?
Let's trim an airplane. So I've kind of made myself an outline here. I want to see how well I can follow along without being like reading directly off of it.
Okay. Well, I'll interject here and there so we can, if you do start doing that, we can just break away from it for a minute and talk about it.
Okay.
All right.
So trimming, what is it? Trimming is basically we're altering the positions of control surfaces to change the flight characteristics of a plane.
Okay.
Is sort of the best way I have to put that into a definition, and we'll kind of talk about that. So, what are we hoping to achieve with trimming? That is to get a plane to fly straight and level. Basically, when we're trimming a plane, we are changing the position of the servo that is moving a control surface.
Mm-hmm.
So that we're raising it, we're lowering it, we're changing its position. So it's moving the control surface to then impart some sort of an effect on the plane.
Now we're changing the 0 point, right? We're adjusting the 0 point in small
of the servo,
right? Of the servo in a very small way, so that the neutral point is now in a point where the plane flies straight and level. That's our goal, right?
Yeah. So basically, if you were to take a servo and set it on your workbench, hook it up to the receiver, and it's going to kick to 0. Assuming all your trims and everything are 0.
Exactly.
It's going to kick to its 0 position. And then you go to put some trim on that channel that servo is hooked up to. it'll be a little difficult to see with just the servo. But if you give it enough trim, you'll start to see that little arm, that servo arm start to move.
What you can do if you want to see it, tape a barbecue skewer onto the arm.
Mm-hmm.
And then
so it's going in the same direction as the arm.
Exactly. And then mark where that neutral point is when you start, and then move the trim, and you'll see the end of the barbecue stick kind of shift left or right depending on where your trim is, where you're shifting the trim.
So
why do we do that though? I mean,
why are we trimming? So we're trimming to overcome undesirable flight characteristics.
Okay.
Typically.
Yeah.
And those can come from engine torque, which will impart some roll onto your plane. What's happening there is as your engine or as your motor is spinning the prop, there's rotational torque you're putting on the prop. Right. But for every action, there's equal opposite. So as you're trying to turn the prop's trying to turn the plane.
Yep.
So you're getting some roll action from that.
And there's a 90-degree offset to the rotational precession. So instead of just trying to turn the plane, it's actually turning left. It's yawing instead of rotating because it's the precession. As well as the air blast is hitting on the side of your plane, which is also putting it a little to the left.
Okay. Yeah. And that'll be where they're putting in thrust angling into the power pods.
Yeah, that usually offsets those
a couple degrees.
Yep.
All right. You'll also want to trim to overcome perhaps battery position issues. So you'll be close to proper CG, but the battery's just a smidge and all. Like we can correct some of that with the trim.
Yep.
We trim for speed, or we trim because of speed. So when you and I've really not gotten a plane trimmed out well on a nice calm day to test this, but when you trim a plane, you're trimming it, at least the level part, or which is the pitch up and down. You're trimming that for a speed so that you fly level at a certain airspeed, such that then when you throttle up, it's trying to maintain that speed. So if you give it more power, it's going to nose up because you're generating more lift.
Right, and the lift is going to be a little bit in front of the center of gravity, so it's going to rotate it up because everything else is equal before that.
And what it's essentially doing is staying at that speed, so the more and more power you give it, the more and more it's going to nose up, trying to maintain that proper speed. And then when you pull the throttle back, is going to nose down. Now, that's my experience with high wing craft. I think low wing craft operate a little differently in that regard. But I'm not.
No, it still does, because it's the speed that's giving you the additional lift. I mean, there is a certain amount of rotation that comes from the engine not being directly through the center of gravity, although if it's designed right, it should be going very close, so you're not going to see much from it. But some of those, like the boat planes, tend to have their motor way up on above the wing, so you're getting some rotation from that. But that aside, what you're seeing is that the lift the extra lift you're generating from the additional speed is creating that rotation. Trimming the elevator will counteract that rotation so that you're still flying level. You're just now going faster.
Right.
Which means you don't have to touch the stick. You can just enjoy it flying straight and level.
Right. So so you get it trimmed out, and this will be way down at the bottom of the segment. You get it trimmed out and you want to fly faster and it still flies straight and level, you're going to give it some nose down trim, because when you speed up, you're giving it more power, which is going to want to nose up because it's trying to maintain an airspeed.
Yep.
So why else would you need to trim? Last thing I've got is for design and construction flaws.
Did you look at my workbench?
I'm looking at my workbench, specifically the 7, because one of my airfoils is symmetrical and the other is not. So I get to have some fun when that comes along.
Yeah.
I also deal with difficulties in that, like the Corsair, I didn't get my horizontal stab horizontal. I never seem to get my vertical stab vertical.
Yeah.
It's hard. There's always there's always bad, like with mine anyway, there's some bad constructions that I would have bad flight characteristics over. And
the
some of those
surfaces
are
can
just gonna be,
correct. Yeah, the surfaces can correct for a lot of that if it's small, and
yeah.
trimming may be all you need to make a correction for that imbalance. I'm going to call it an imbalance because of construction irregularities.
Mm-hmm. And at the same time, now there's some construction issues. Like if my vertical or horizontal stab is not level, like sure, I may be able to give some rudder and some aileron trim to get it flying, straight.
Right.
But the moment I give it some elevator, well, at the end of the day, that horizontal is still not level. So when I give it elevator, I'm going to be inducing
a
bit of a
rudder
tendency.
action along with your elevator effectively. It's a coordinated turn effectively, but and look, and
but only
and
in one direction.
But it's not in the design, so that's not what you want. Like, so if it's most of the gliders, their rudder is actually the rudder hinge is at an angle, so that when you put in rudder, it's actually giving slight down elevator and the rudder action, which ends up creating a coordinated turn because most gliders have two controls. It's just a rudder and an elevator. So by just putting in the rudder and controlling with the rudder, you're effectively doing small coordinated turns. That's on purpose. But if you're like me and you put that in by accident, well, now you got to make a correction for it, and it'll do some things you don't expect when you're trying to fly with it, and that's what you want to try to get rid of with the trim.
Yeah, and so part of that, say, bad construction then is, if one wing's airfoil shape is a little different than the other wing's airfoil shape, so you're getting more lift off one side, or your dihedral's a little off. That's some of what the trim can help overcome. So, how are we going to trim? And I'm aiming this more specifically at maiden flights.
Yeah.
Because I was sort of the environment that question was brought up, but the information carries over. I like to start with all my servos and control surfaces zeroed. So I try to make sure when I'm hooking everything up on the plane, I'm installing servos that are in the zero position, and then as I'm about to hook up control surfaces or hook my control rods, that I power up the receiver and have the servos plugged in so that they again center, because I don't have a centering tool, so I use my receiver to send a center signal,
which is another way to do it, and that's what I end up doing because I figured I'm already putting it all together anyway.
I mean, having a servo center tool would be great. Just I don't. So So yeah, I like to have my servo centered and then try to get the control surfaces set up so that they're as in line as can be. So ailerons I want in line with the rest of the wing, so it's like the aileron was never cracked and formed. It was all still part of the wing.
Exactly.
That's, elevator I like to be level, rudder straight if possible, although I rarely get my rudder installed straight, so I always have to kick it a little bit. But I like to start with everything in the zero position, throttle it up, typical maiden flight procedure, 75, 80%, get it up in the air. And I'm accustomed to having to fight a maiden. Like I've not, other than the Focke, I've not really had maidens go smooth.
Where you just release it from your hand and like, oh my God, this is flying great already.
It's immediately out the gate trying to get this plane under control. Generally. Now, some of that could be the days that I go. So one of the tips would be to choose a day that is calm.
Yeah.
Little to no wind. And I would almost say a day with no clouds, because no clouds probably means no updrafts.
It does.
It
doesn't entirely, but they're less effect. They have less effect. Yeah.
Yeah. But get it up in the air, and I mean, you're going to fight it. So if you're like me, you're going to end up fighting it. Or if you have a nice calm day and your plane's constructed well, it may come out of hand and be great. You just have to put some small inputs. But then what you're going to start doing is putting in some trim to start getting it to that low straight and level. And I would start with your roll trim before you start trying to mess with elevator trim, because if you're flying and you're having to, say you're nose high, and you're pushing those in, rather you can just throttle back to a point that your plane's flying fairly level, and then start working your roll, and then you can work with your up down trim from there. But when you're trimming, and I guess I'm assuming a certain amount of knowledge on how trim works, but when you give it a click in a direction, say you need to know which switches on your transmitter are doing which trims, because I know my Radio Master.
They're typically the little tiny switches next to the sticks.
Mm-hmm.
And they're either the one on the left is the one, and it goes up and down. Well, that's the one that is to trim your elevator. And the one that goes left and right, again, if it's on the stick with the aileron, it's going to be trimming that aileron control, whatever that stick controls. And so remember, your pulse width modulation is the signal is sending between 1,000 and 2,000. The mid stick is 1,500. When you're trimming, when you move the stick all the way left, you're adjusting a 500, I'll call it point, but it's actually 500 milliseconds of adjustment in the width of that signal. Well, the trim is shifting that 1,500 midpoint over 4 milliseconds. Or right, and honestly, you can set if that's 4, 2, 1, 10, whatever you want. I think they typically start out at 4, and then you can make adjustments from there. But basically, you're doing really small shifts in that center line.
Yeah, and that's getting a little more into the weeds on that one than I was planning to go at this point. Okay. I did want to touch on that briefly, but yeah,
we'll come back to it if we need to.
No, you're good. We can kind of briefly go over here. So you're right. A signal goes from 1,000 milli or microsecond to 2,000, and 1,500 is the center point. And when you start clicking in some trim, you're changing not where that 1,500 is, but you're changing what the 0 point is. So the 0, when you're 0 input, that's 1,500. But then when you start clicking in some trim, then you're making that 0 point instead of 1,500, say 1505, 1510.
Which translates to
a different servo position, right?
Correct.
And then when you give it a little bit of right, that is additive to
that 0
what you've already put in as far as trim goes, right?
Exactly.
So if you're putting just a smidgen of right stick, and that's say 40 microseconds, and you've already given it 10 in trim, so you're at 1510, and then you're going to give it another 40 with the stick, you're at 1550, which again is swinging that servo further. But that's getting way down. I didn't intend to go quite that deep.
No, that's kind of important. I feel like it's important to understand what's happening, and the truth of the matter is, Joe's going to tell you kind of like what you need to do to set it so that you got it to do what you want. I was trying to provide that information so that way you understand what's happening, because sometimes you'll look at it and be like, this isn't making sense. Why is this doing what it's doing? If you understand what the clicks are actually doing with the control system, you might understand why the servo is doing what it's doing. So that was kind of my goal with that. So, but go ahead. And so after should you be doing it like right after you take off to the ground, or should you get higher?
Well, thank you for bringing that up, because I missed that line on my notes.
That's okay. It's kind of, well, I do my trim as fast as I can reasonably get. Because sometimes I can't quite get high enough without crashing the plane if I don't trim.
Right. Well, in an ideal world, if you can get up there. I think you say 3 accidents high?
Yeah, 3 accidents high. So basically, if you could do like 3 loops on top of each other with the plane, that's high. That's about the height you need.
So get up to some altitude, and then start trimming your plane out. It can help if you've got a buddy out in the field to give you a hand. I've had Matthew reach over and say, "Hey, Matt, can you give me some of this trim, some of that trim? Because the plane is so far out that I can't get it."
If you let go of the sticks, it's going to barrel roll or turn in a really rough direction quick.
Right. And some of it too is on the Radio Master. So where I would think my elevator trim is, there's two switches. There's, one low and one high, and I can never remember which one is actually doing my elevator trim.
It's the low one.
It's the low one.
Yep.
But I always question that. So
I know. You're like, I don't want to do the wrong one.
Mm-hmm. So play with trimming it. Try, trim it as best you can. Play with some, and then land it. Especially on a maiden, go ahead and bring it in. Even if you got to fight it, and take a break.
Well, how do you know if you've got it trimmed right?
Well, when you can take your hands off the sticks and it flies straight.
Right. So basically, once you've got it going and you think it's trimmed correctly, you bring it to a level, flat flight, right? So it's going the direction you want and it's going straight and level. Then you take your hands off. You don't give it any input once it's in that manner. If it's trimmed correctly, it will continue to fly straight and level. It won't have a slow rolling tendency or a slight incline. Again, you want to have the throttle to where you want to generally fly at, which for me tends to be between 50 and 75% throttle. And as long as it's trimmed out right, the elevator set where you want, it will fly level at that. Just know that when you change the throttle level, it will still have a tendency to go up. And if you lower the throttle, it'll have a tendency to nose down just slightly, but that's natural with any plane. So, but if you're at a cruising, that's your cruising speed throttle setting, like at 50% or 75%. Just as long as that's where level is, your trim's set to that, you'll be in good shape. Just know that when you throttle up, you'll probably have to give a little bit of elevator input.
Yeah. And I talk about, fly for a few minutes and then bring it down and set it down, land it, take a break. Any maiden flight that I make, I still get like worms and butterflies in my stomach. I just get tore up. My hands are shaking. Look, my Corsair maiden, I couldn't tell what its flight tendencies were because my thumb was swinging the stick left or right, just back and forth, back and forth. I couldn't keep my thumbs level.
Yeah.
So I'm fighting me and the plane and the wind. So got it set down, took a breather, calmed down for a few minutes, and then got it back up in the air and continued trying to trim it out. Now, that was not the best day to try. I had some wind. Somebody came by, was watching me fly, tried to show off a little bit, lost in the tree. That's beside the point. If we're doing, do as I say, not as I do. Keep flying, keep trimming. And yes, when you get it to the point that it's on a calm day, when it's flying straight, it's not rolling, it's not turning, it's not climbing, that's properly trimmed. And that can take a little while to get there, but once you get there, some of the intention, I guess, is one, you just don't have to constantly have your hands on the sticks. You take your hands off, watch your plane fly, you turn it, change direction, start bringing it back, let it fly some more, you can take your hands off. Some guys will put their planes into a very gentle left-hand turn, which you'll have to give it some left roll or left rudder if you're on a 3-channel and some elevator up to put it into a roll that does not decay over time, or put it into a turn that does not decay over time and lose altitude. But they'll put it into real gentle, wide turns that they just let the planes fly. I mean, some guys just set their transmitter down and walk away. I wouldn't recommend that, but you can achieve that on a very calm day.
And in a perfectly trimmed plane.
Right. Now, after you get it trimmed, you bring it down, you're kind of done either for the moment, or you're done for the day, or you're just, taking a break from flying. After I get a plane trimmed out, or at least close to trim, I like to bring it down, and if I can, translate the trim into the actual push rod. And what I mean by that is, if I'm having to give a good bit of elevator up to keep it nose level, then either shorten the push rod or lengthen it, depending on which direction you mounted
depending on which direction
your push rod on. Right. but I'm trying to bend it, stretch it, reposition if I've got the screw that tightens down onto it. I loosen that up and change its length.
Mm-hmm.
But what I'm aiming for there is that when the servo is returned to zero trim, I zero the trim out, that the control surface is in that trimmed position. So if it was trimmed a little elevator up, then when the servo returns to zero, and I take all the trim out, the elevator is in that position. Same thing with the rudder and the ailerons.
Do you have a method to do that? Like a process that you might recommend?
I don't, honestly, other than maybe take a picture beforehand.
You could, right.
So I was thinking about it while I was typing.
That's a good idea.
Yeah, I was thinking about it as I was typing these notes up, and I was like, maybe if I, but
you could get a thing to measure the angle, right? You could take a piece of paper, and draw a line, like put it in the gap between the surface and the rest of the thing, and then draw the line, right? So you have like wherever the level thing is, and then wherever the control surface angle, you can draw that, and then return it to zero, and then move the control rod so that the surface comes back to that line you drew at zero trim. So that's one way. There's other ways. I'm sure you'll find yours. But I just wanted to give somebody who's new to at least a method, maybe. That picture is a great example, too, because you could look at the picture and look at the plane, and look at the picture and look at the plane, and if that'll also give you pretty close.
Here's why I bring that up, is I'm not trying to zero the trim back out and have the control surfaces in those trim positions. That's not just so that the nicety of, my trims are zero and it's trimmed out about right. Although there's a nicety to that when you change the 0 point of that servo. So when you include trim, I'm going to try to be concise and clear about this. When you put in trim and you move that servo is no longer in its center position, which means you don't have the same amount of throw in that servo that you once did.
Right. Let's say the servo is a 60-degree servo. If it's centered perfectly, that means it has 30 degrees left rotation and 30 degrees right.
Right.
When you move the center, let's say left, 10 degrees worth of trim points, that's have
an extreme example.
It's an extreme example, but it also means that you only get 20% of movement on the left.
20 degrees, yes.
20 degrees of movement on the left, which means you don't have as much control authority in that direction.
Mm-hmm.
And so basically you lose fidelity and your ability to control in extreme situations. Like there are times when you've got to pull out of a dive awful fast and you want all 30 degrees of that rotation.
Mm-hmm.
And if you only have 20, you may not come out of that dive.
In addition, if you want your trim zeroed, so you want your control surfaces in the right position when your trim's at zero, so that when you then take it out to fly again and you need to put in trims, you're not already near one of the trim extremes, because you only get so much range out of trim before it's like you can't go any further.
Right, and then you have to hold it on the sticks, and good luck.
Right. So by putting the by zeroing the trims out and having the control surface in the correct position, like it was trimmed, well, it is trimmed then, that kind of resets how much trim motion you have again. So you don't have to worry about going out. You had to give it like almost all the nose up trim just to get it right. And then the next time you go out, you want to give nose up trim when you got no more to give.
Right.
So
you're at the limit. So tough. And the other half with that is if you're like me, let's say you're running on the radio link and you have 15 models. So I don't set my model up to be like, oh, this is a Spitfire model and this is whatever. I say, no, this is the flying wing. This is a 4-channel. This is a 6-channel. 6-channel has flaps and gears set up. The 4-channel is aileron, elevator, rudder, and throttle, and that's it. The wing is the mix, the aileron, elevator mix, so the elevon mix. And whatever wing I bring out is set to that channel. I pull up that model, and that model is going to have to fly whatever that plane is. And it may be the Piranha, but it may also be the Arrow, and it may be the Versa wing, and it may be any other wing I might have, like the one we built out of Depron. Like, all of those wings have the same control system, and if the servos are put in the same manner, if they're trimmed right and they're trimmed to 0, I just have to bind it to that. I just have to set up that model and say, okay, we're good. I'm in the right control system. It's ready to go because the plane has been trimmed so that when everything's zeroed out, it should fly as long as the control system is set up correctly. Like I'm using
Now,
the ailerons.
I would argue against that and say,
I don't want to have to, but the Radio Link only has 15 models. You run out quick.
Oh, okay. I missed that
that's
part.
a model memory is 15, which means I've got like one for sim, one for the 2-channel, one for a 3-channel, one for a 5. Yeah, no, and it's I do set them to specific models, but I usually share that model. Like, I set it up for a Scout, but the Scout, so the Scout is a 5-channel. I set up with flaps, and it's a split deal. Which also means that when I fly the Spitfire, I can bind the Spitfire to it. I can also bind a bunch of other planes that are 4 channels with split ailerons and set them as flaperons. But so I know that. But when you're sharing it, if all of them are zeroed out, all the trims are set right, I don't have to adjust. I just bind the new model and go.
I got you.
That's one of the benefits of having it zeroed out. When you set up the model, trims set to 0, you should just be able to fly it and not have to worry about it. And then, like you said, if it's a weird day where there's extra wind or whatever, you can adjust the trims there for that day,
right? And
then bring it back to 0, and you should be able to fly it next time in whatever conditions are there and trim for that condition. Yeah, it's a big benefit.
Yeah. Now, if you don't want to, let's say your trims are, the amount of trimming that's needed is small.
Mm-hmm.
And it's not worth, let's say it's not worth going in and making those adjustments to then have 0 trim, which I'm not going to say you're ever going to get it so that 0 trim is perfect. You'd be close, and then you'd have to trim it out again. Say you're going in bending push rods and stuff. I'm not saying you're ever going to get it so that servos in 0 position are perfect. But
you'll be close where you won't have to worry about it.
Yeah, sorry, I thought I heard something. Oh, that's so dumb. I thought I heard Rachel.
Yeah.
And it was actually my footrest down there creaking. But because I was talking, I just heard noise. So.
Yeah, and you got the headphones on. It's not. You're the directional capabilities are limited now. That's fine. All right.
So I'm almost done here.
I know. Yeah, you are.
But you can get them close, and then the next flight you trim it back in.
Mm-hmm.
So one of the things you can do is, rather than have, if you can't get the control surfaces exactly where exactly trimmed out perfectly, and that be the center point of your trim, you can, OpenTX has an option in the bottom of the mixes.
I think that's where the guy said
where
it was.
The bottom of the channel is one of those. At the very bottom, it'll have the trims to sub-trim option. You scroll all the way down, you can click on it, and that'll take whatever your current trim settings are and save them in sub-trim, which is basically altering a 0 point without any trim. The other thing you can do, and I've done it when I need to, that's basically taking that 1500 position we talked about and changing it without having without putting any clicks of trim in there.
But still allowing you the full range of trim adjustment on that center point.
Yeah. I'm not sure that I'm being entirely clear on that one.
I think so.
But, the other thing I've done, so say with the Corsair, I did not use a Y splitter for the servos, the aileron servos. I had each aileron on its own. You can go into those channels if you need to, and for that channel, you can click over to where that 1500 is, and you can scroll that, and it'll change the position of one of the ailerons. If you need to adjust them manually from each other, because I can never seem to get, like, the servos never seem to be perfectly zero. I never seem to get them exactly right when I'm putting it together.
So interesting thing about the servos is that they have an odd number of teeth. So that
I thought so.
yep. So if you put the servo arm on one side, they may be perpendicular. If you put it to the other side, it is an odd number of teeth. So it is not going to be centered on the opposite side.
Well, then I always pick the wrong side of the.
Well,
I mean, every time.
And sometimes you kind of have to, and know that you're going to probably have to trim a little bit with that, or make sure that your adjustments account for that offset, I guess.
Mm-hmm.
You can't always have the centered, because they're always on the same side. And if you're doing ailerons, like, they have to be opposing to have the correct motion. So you can't possibly have the servo arm kick off the same side. I mean, there might be ways, but
well,
yeah. So know that just by putting on the servo arm, you may not be able to get it to perfect center just to start with. If that's the side you needed to go off of, and you're like, oh, shoot. All right, well, let me put this in and I'll trim it. And basically you're adjusting where the center of this, everything is. So,
well, hopefully that's been beneficial enough. I'm a little concerned, but we'll see. In sort of a last thing that I want to put out there as far as trim goes, it was something that we've talked about here before, because I thought it was Jesse that brought it up with me, and now nobody remembers who said it. But you found a video from what? Painless 360.
Yeah, he actually has done about, I'll call it 2 videos. He's done one general video about trim, and he has just recently, within like a week of recording this, he's put out one about how the OpenTX, you can set, it's literally like a momentary switch you can set it to, and it will do the trim to subtrim. On whatever your trim settings are currently, you hit that button, and then we'll move it to subtrims and set your trims to 0, so you can just keep flying.
What I took from that was actually that it'll take whatever your sticks are currently and make that your trim.
And make that your 0 trim.
Well, that'll be your trim.
Okay.
It won't. You can then go trim to subtrim, but say you're.
Oh, okay, I got you.
You're having to like give roll right and nose down and some rudder to the left.
Yeah, which happens.
You're having to do all that. You can then reach up and flip that momentary switch.
Yeah.
And all those positions
0
go
out.
straight to trim, and you can then let go of the sticks, and it'll be doing
what you want.
Now, I think there may be some limit of that
it'll
only it'll only go up to the maximum range that trim normally allows, because trim only goes so far either way.
Mm-hmm.
But that's a button that's a switch I'm going to have to set up.
Yeah, me too. That's going to be so immensely helpful. I can't tell you how many times I've had the stick, just a tiny bit off this way and this way and this way, and that's the only way I can get it to like fly straight. And I'm like, boy, oh boy, I wish I could get my hands off these sticks.
Yep.
So yes,
and that's
yeah.
I mean, sometimes me trimming out, if it's bad enough, I'll launch it and immediately be fighting it. And I'll fly it and try to figure out what's going on with it, and then I'm going to set it down, and then I will do my trimming.
Yeah,
while it's on the ground. Don't
forget to bring your pliers and your little hex wrench or whatever it is that allows you to adjust the servo control arm, the push rod. I mean.
Yeah, because sometimes it's just too far off for me to try to mess with in the air, because I don't want to take my hands off the stick, so I'll fight it, land it, take a breather, make the adjustments I want to make, and then I'll put it back in the air and try it again.
Just remember, if you adjust the push rod length, reset the trim to 0 on your transmitter, because now it's at you're trying to set that push rod length so that you're moving the controls to be where trim 0, your neutral trim is. So if you add 20 points of trim, it's going to set the whole thing way off. And you want to bring that trim back to 0. You're trying to set up the surface so that your trim 0 point they're identical.
All right. I think I know what you're trying to say.
Yeah, I'm sorry. That got awful. I'm sorry. Just strike it. Forget about it. Say, Matt doesn't know a thing. Just listen to Joe.
Nah, it's tough. It's tough because we're talking about something that'd be great if we were doing a video format, but since we're audio only,
right,
it's a little tough.
Well, look in the show notes, because we have both of those trim videos from Painless 360 in there, so you can go and get a visual to go along with basically similar audio.
Yeah.
He's not the only one, so look around if you're still confused.
Yeah.
We hope this helped, though.
Yeah, hopefully we've helped to not cause more confusion. Hop into Discord, let us know.
Yeah, right. Tell us, you guys stink at telling us about trim. Or like, hey, thanks, that was amazingly helpful.
Which could be true.
Yeah, it could be.
Yeah.
I hope we're helpful.
So, I think that's about everything we had that we want to talk about. We want to talk about workbenches for a second?
We could do that if you'd like, and then we can close it out.
Sure.
Joe, what are you going to work on?
Mine really hasn't changed. I've got the 7 that I need to finish up and reach out to Sam about the wingtips I need. I got the repairs on the duck. I need to... The Focke will be easy. I just need to glue its tail section where it tore. And then there's still that depper on a wing out there that I haven't finished up.
Yeah, finish that up. Put do like I need to do as well, and make sure you put that barbecue skewer diagonal. And I think we're both gonna have a lot of fun with those.
Okay. And what's going on with you?
Well, I'm gonna keep at that magician, the sorcerer, the Dollar Tree foam board version of the sorcerer. I call it the magician. I have plans drawn up, so I'm adjusting the plans as I go when I realize, like, oh boy, I should switch this or that. So that way, when I'm done and I have success getting that into the air, I should be able to put a link at least to some plans that if you want to build your own really ridiculously big airplane made out of Dollar Tree foam board, it should be available for you. I'm going to keep at the flying louver. I flew the flying louver last time. It was a hot mess. It did get in the air. So I'm going to test a couple different things and see if maybe moving the battery even further forward, or maybe changing the thrust angle. I don't know. I'm going to keep at it a little bit longer. It hasn't been completely destroyed, and that is just a fun little plane I'd love to have tooling around the cul-de-sac. I have the J1000. I still have to bring downstairs so that it's on the workbench that I'm working at, and the Lincoln Sport, who's over here. I need to fix the motor mount and see if I didn't strip a servo. I'm thinking in my head, my memory says there was a servo that got stripped, and that's why I didn't go much further with it. I had to pull the servo out and replace it with something I didn't have at the time. Right. So if I replace the servo that's not working right, I should be able to put a motor system in there with a better motor. I think the motor mount on it was poorly thought out when I first designed it. So I think I've got a couple better ideas since I've built that to mount the motor stronger. So I'll see about installing that and seeing if I can fly that plane. So the plane is a Lincoln Sport from 1924. So this is just after World War I was ended, and we were moving towards new, interesting designs. This is basically like a home built project, as in go to your local hardware store, buy the materials, and you can build this plane.
All right.
Is the idea, which of course absolutely intrigues me. So my friend's great uncle, or no, it's a great uncle, Charles E. Churchill. Yes, relative to the Churchill from England. He basically went to a flight school. He started a flight school in Battle Creek, Iowa, after he was taught in Illinois, where he became friends with Charles Lindbergh. I apparently called him Shorty, according to an article that she passed to me. So there's a picture of her grandmother as a baby sitting in the cockpit, not a baby, but like a toddler or a young kid.
Yeah.
Maybe 8, just sitting in the cockpit while he's standing out front of his plane that he built. And he started a flight school after he built this thing. And so it was just one of those personal stories like, oh my God, are you serious? This is real. And of course she shared these articles, which I have in this article I'm sharing with Joe. So I built a model of it out of foam board, and she was thinking like, this would be amazing to have, to be able to fly around a field, like that she would be able to kind of connect with her long dead relative in a way, that she just thought it'd be pretty neat. So I got really far, but I don't know. It hit a couple snags and I didn't know how to really come at it. So I've kind of put it away until I got some more experience. So I'm hoping maybe now I have enough experience to get this little bird in the air. It's like a small park flyer. So,
okay.
And we'll see. I'm going to work on that and see if I can't get that in the air. It'll be a lot of fun. She's been learning to be a doctor. And so on the weekends, she every other weekend gets to come home and hang out with her family. And one of the things she expressed she would find it fun to be able to come out to the field and watch this thing fly around. Mm-hmm. So that's an excuse to go do something I've been wanting to do for a while. That was a long way around that. Sorry.
No, you're good.
All right. But otherwise that's about it. I mean, kind of bring up some old projects and see if I can get the ones that are mostly finished on the way.
All right. Well, anything else you want to talk about today?
No, I think, nope.
All right. Well, guys, as always, thank you for tuning in and listening. Hopefully this episode was more helpful than harmful in regards to learning how to trim. As always, if you have any questions, feel free to reach out to us. aviationrcnoob@gmail.com, or you can reach Matthew at aviationrcnoob.com, or you can reach me at joe@aviationrcnoob.com, or as always, look in the show notes. You can find a link to our Discord server. Feel free to jump in and join us and hang with us. And also feel free to hop in, ask any questions you need in getting set up for the October 22nd Sim Night.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
We'd love to see you there.
Yeah. Well, we're going to go ahead and get on out of here, guys. We will see y'all next time.
All right. See you next time. Bye now.